Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the budget meeting of the Commission, the last in the sequence with the referrals from the panels feeding in. Apologies, I welcome Councillor Williams, substituting for Councillor Barlow, and we have Councillor Nick Draper substituting for Sally Kenny, otherwise no apologies I'm aware of. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? No. And the minutes of our last meeting, you take that as accurate and agreed? Yes? Thank you. Right, well, the only item of business this evening, in fact, is the business plan. I propose to invite Caroline. Caroline, welcome in person, that's nice. And we've also got Hannah Doody, in fact, as our Chief Exec dialing in, so welcome Hannah. And to our leader, welcome Mark. Caroline, I'm going to ask you to open with the big picture. I think we'll look at the capital budget before we go to the detailed savings. Then we'll take in any references from the panels and consider whether we want to make referrals back to Cabinet. Okay with everyone? Yeah. So, Caroline, can I invite you to start with possibly now rather familiar? Off we go.
Thank you. So obviously I came to the Commission in November to give you the update on where we had got to the first stages of the business plan and rolling forward of the MTFS. And subsequently to the December Cabinet, we took some revenue savings to help mitigate the gap that we had identified, looked at the inflation pay and prices provisions we had set aside, and we had some information through around the council tax base. So an improvement over the previous year in light of the impact of COVID on our residents, and therefore a higher take up of the council tax support scheme. So whilst the numbers had reduced, we're still not to the level that it was in 2019, i.e. pre-COVID. So there is still a knock-on impact being felt by our residents as part of COVID and what we're looking to do there. We had a look at the capital programme and bought the draft capital programme and looked at how we were going to finance that, and the details were set out in the November papers, and certainly I'll take you through those later on. And I think particularly of interest for this panel was the level of savings that have been identified. So we had looked to mitigate the gap, particularly in 22-23. There were savings being brought forward for 23-24, but very few further savings in those later years. So the position as at the end of December was we had a balanced budget for 22-23, but still a gap of 12.8 million in 23-24. We had at that stage built in the 2% council tax increase and the 1% adult social care precept. And for those of you who are sort of eagle-eyed, you'd have seen that we took to Cabinet on Monday night an further update to the business plan. So I'll take you through some of those changes as well, just because it gives you a fuller picture with some of the issues that we are looking at. That also includes an update on the actual settlement. So some of the information we have been able to build in, but there will still be further adjustments in the report which will come through to Cabinet in February, just because of the timings of certain issues. But certainly on the whole, I would say it was a good settlement. However, it was still only a one-year settlement, so that in itself is disappointing. There was some improvements and increases in grants for adult social care. We got some funding towards the Fair Cost of Care Fund and our implementation to help support the markets, and also to plan for changes to the systems that we required to make sure that there is no one pays above a certain amount towards their care costs. We were fairly close to our assumptions about the new homes bonus, and a side effect of probably one of the only few upsides to COVID has been the impact for TfL on the cost of the Freedom Pass, and therefore a number of people undertaking journeys. So we have seen a subsequent saving as part of that. And we have built in some monies to assist with tackling our DSG deficit ahead of information from the DfE about the outcome of the safety valve discussions. So what we have also done as part of the January Cabinet papers is taken a draft capital strategy and draft treasury management strategy. And certainly within the capital strategy, we have identified and linked each of the schemes back to priorities outlined in the Your Merton paper, which was also approved at Cabinet in January. So hopefully people can start to see the synergies between the key priorities identified through that consultation process and how we're looking to take that forward. Clearly, longer term plans regarding Your Merton, we had said earlier on in the rollout of this that there would be further updates come the later on in the new financial year to be able to see how we take forward medium and longer term plans on that basis. You will have also seen as part of the slightly later than planned, so apologies, I did set some hairs running when I was referring to an information pack at an earlier meeting, that you did eventually get that through, and that outlines all of the savings that have been brought forward and have been to the 3 previous panels. It also details the unachieved savings. So as I explained to the Commission when I came in November, for the first time that I've certainly done it here, previously where savings were deemed to be not achievable, that was the first point of call of finding alternative savings ahead of bringing forward any new savings. In light of officers' response in dealing with the pandemic, it was felt that there were certain areas where the focus was on clearly responding to that, delivering those services, and there was reduced capacity of staff anyway. So to be able to then call on and deliver those savings was felt was in this year only to be not practical or fair on those. So we have reversed them out. We have said to directors that if they want to bring them forward at later stages, further down the line, they can bring those back. But for now, the budget will be reversed to cover those. And those are also detailed in the information pack for you. We have got the draft equality assessments, so I'd welcome any comments on the equality assessments. They are the start of the process as we would look to implement savings. Say, for example, if there were any staffing ones, then there would be further updates and refreshing of those equality assessments. But if you think there are any issues at this stage, then please do let us know. So certainly on when you look at the outcomes that we have on page 29 of the information pack, of the 32 equality assessments, 25 have a level 1 outcome and 7 have a level 2. So limited impact, but still for those level 2s, we still do need to keep an eye on what that might mean as we go forward and would look to implement those proposals. We have draft service plans. It was agreed that we would do a light touch on the service plans this year, because obviously with Your Merton coming forward and new priorities, new performances, new targets, that in the start of next year, we'd then look to refresh those completely and look at those. But we still felt they're very important to give you an understanding of the services, the targets that are we're expecting to be delivered against those, and an update on where we had been previously. So those are there for your perusal as well, and we'll willingly take any comments on those. Happy to stop there, Chair, before we then get into the detailed savings for this actual panel. Thank you.
Questions for Caroline of a general nature? Nick, please.
Thank you, Caroline. You won't be surprised to hear me. My question will be on the DSG. And I'd like you to go into a little bit more detail. I know you've presented to the group, but if you could please just go into where we are actually with the discussions with the DfE in a little bit more detail, and also current monies that are having to be set aside until we actually get into a position or agreed settlement with the DfE.
So thank you. So in some ways, hot off the press, we got an email yesterday from colleagues at the DfE just to let us know that they expect to come back shortly on the outcomes of the safety valve discussions. And we're sort of going to go back and say that it'd be good to know when, because it's having an impact on our final budget, because we're running out of time to be able to pull that together in some ways. So I explained that we've put some additional resources into the business plan of £1.1 million per annum over the next 5 years to assist and give some capacity to Jane to help deliver some of those changes that we required. And in some ways, we need to do those changes regardless of whether we get any safety valve funding through. The challenge is that whilst we asked for some monies, we didn't know the level and size of the pot that was available to know, because they were looking to help 5 other local authorities. So we don't know our share of the pot, how successful we will be, and the timings of when we will get those monies. We did ask for support over the first 3 years of our plan. However, they said if they gave us that support over the first 3 years, then with the monitoring that they want to put in place, it meant that it would tail off in those final 2 years. So they weren't necessarily comfortable with that. So that was the only steer that we got, that it's likely that we would get funding back over those 5 years. And though previous authorities did get some funding in the current financial year. So that's why we've also started to flag in our financial monitoring reports our current outturn position, which is a deficit, could potentially swing into a surplus position depending on the amount of funding we get, because of the monies we've currently set aside for the DSG. So there's quite a few moving bits and pieces still to come through. With regards to the monies that we have set aside currently to fund our DSG deficit, it was too complicated to try and review the levels that we set aside ahead of until we know the outcome of those discussions with the DfE. So if I just take you to in the December paper, because those are the papers you'll have in front of you. I'm just trying to find the page electronically. It will be what we have currently set aside in 22-23 is 10.5 million, because at the time we said we would make provision for half of the deficit that we had assumed going forward, but those amounts increase over future years because we had assumed that the deficit would increase. The statutory override that's in place ends at the end of 22-23, which allowed us to put aside the DSG reserve into an unusable reserve, and therefore did not affect our value for money considerations. We have asked if there is an update from DULUC, because they were the ones who brought in that statutory override, and they were minded not to continue with it because it doesn't actually solve the situation. But we're still waiting to see what support we might get through that. We did get some further dedicated schools grant over and above what we had assumed, but we don't know whether that will then impact on the amount of monies we might get back from the DfE. So again, we're waiting to hear from that. So if you've got page 88 of your papers in front of you tonight for the commission, you'll see there is a line in the first block of the table, two lines up from the first grayed out line, provision for the DSG deficit. So those are the amounts of monies that we have currently built in based on previous assumptions. And once we know whether or not we're going to get funding from the DfE, we will then look to revise those for the February Cabinet papers.
Are we also confident now that we understand how we got into the situation? I believe the former Finance Council Cabinet member, Councillor Byers, obviously no longer with us on the council. I think at this, my understanding, as he said at the CYP panel, that it took very much too long for us to understand exactly how the deficit was being run up. So going forward, I appreciate we're looking for a safety valve and help from the DfE, that we've got a better understanding of exactly how we got into this position.
So certainly when you look at the increase of education, health and social care plans that we have in comparison to the national average, we have a significant increase year on year. So it does appear to be a cluster amongst the South London boroughs. So if you consider, so last year was the first year that the DfE entered into safety valve discussions, 3 of which were London boroughs, 2 of which were our neighbouring boroughs of Kingston and Richmond. The fact that we're now part of that, so there is some other anomalies behind that. We also suffer because we have very few special schools. So in some ways a hangover from ILIA and how school provision was first identified, or how when we were local education authority as well as first set up. But we have been expanding our special schools, but that expansion has not been able to keep up with the level of increase in our EHCPs. I would also say that the market in this area for those external places has been very mature, and I'm just conscious of what I do say, it could be seen to be exploiting the local authority with the level of costs, because they know we have very little room for manoeuvre. And not very many places to go to. But certainly now with the analysis that we've done, we've got a clear understanding of our 0 to 4-year-olds and also our sort of 16 to 25-year-olds, the type of provision that's required, whether any of those can be stepped up or stepped down. And I think particularly because we have some children come through at a later stage, so it's like understanding more how they suddenly appeared, because we should have known about them. They shouldn't suddenly come through at the age of 18, 19 to suddenly need education provision. So I think with that work, and then keeping reviews, doing the annual reviews, being very clear about the type of provision that's required, because we should be looking at what the EHCPs are actually achieving for the children. There will always be some children with their level of need. They will always need an EHCP and considerable support, and indeed increasing support as they age. But there should be some where what we put in place should actually assist them to taper down those level of needs. So that's what we're also looking to do, working very closely with our schools. So with Jane and now Elizabeth, engaging more with the schools forum to make sure that they understand that almost if they can play their part more, then there's more money for them, because we're taking money away from the schools to pay for the higher needs. So if we can balance that right as well, then that does help.
Nick, actually, it's just worth adding, the FNTG had a very detailed paper from Jane McSherry, which dispelled one of my misconceptions that it was largely demand from parents. And she said it is as much demand from the schools, from teachers, actually. So, but it is complex, but certainly that paper is worth looking at. John.
Yeah. It was in the news last week, Caroline, that inflation is running at about 5%, or just over 5% at the moment. And am I right in looking on page 14 that your provision for inflation with pay and prices is just what, 2%? Is that right?
So what we have done at this stage, we have looked at increasing the inflation allowance, as you corrected, to 2.5%.
Yeah.
But we are keeping that under review and looking at what it means for when we pull together the final papers for February. We also added in some additional monies in for utilities. So utilities is separate from that.
Yeah.
And indeed, we've been looking at our gas buying and hedging ahead of, because there's the Breakspear pipeline. So again, something I don't normally get involved in, but looking at sort of what's happening in the Ukraine and seeing the impact that's having on gas prices has been quite frightening, but demand is coming down and therefore some of those prices is improving. We never fully provide for the level of inflation.
Yeah.
And so far we've been okay, but we just want to make sure how we deal with that. There is also, we increased the excess inflation by a further 250,000 as well. Not all of the contracts and not all of the services need an inflation increase,
Yeah.
and that is kept under review during the monitoring as we go forward. So we will keep an eye on what that does mean. Clearly, inflation today was the highest it's been for over like sort of 30 years.
Yeah.
So clearly a concern, and particularly within the social care side, John Morgan is engaging with providers to have discussions around the level of increases. So clearly we've got the adult social care precept, which is fully passported through to them. So that would look to help mitigate some of that increase. So again, there's quite a few areas we can call on to look at how we cover those inflationaries.
Thank you, Chairman. I come here tonight as a substitute, and I'm not on one of the other panels, so I'm not into the detail of precisely how the DSG deficit has arisen and the role of head teachers in that, in shuffling off kids to different provision. But I am actually looking at the updated MTFS. So although we're looking at page 88 of our papers for tonight, I'm looking at page 25 of the cabinet papers, which are from Monday, where I see that actually the appropriation from the balancing the budget reserve has dropped from 16 odd million to 11.529. And the DSG deficit figure remains the same at 10,543. I think I've probably established a bit of a reputation for myself. I was banging on about reserves at these kind of meetings. Actually, I have no problem with the use of reserves to smooth expenditure year on year. But the fact of the matter is, at least I'm kind of putting it as a question, but it's my main thrust really. This is tonight's whole meeting is, you could liken to the cycle park in the director's car park, the cycle sheds. The elephant in the room is the DSG. If you look at the MTFS for 22-23, there's only less than £1 million between the DSG safety valve figure and the appropriation from the balancing the budget reserve. So in actual fact, there is less than £1 million going from the balancing the budget reserve into all the other services. And there was, or could have been, an opportunity to use the reserve to support other services. And that's just lost. And it's got nothing to do, has it, with COVID. It's got nothing to do with settlements from local government that we hear endlessly about. It's all to do with decisions taken in this council about how to deal with this deficit. Am I right or am I wrong?
So the provision that we have set aside for the DSG is as was outlined in the papers that we took to council in March of last year. I made the point to the DfE when we were having the safety valve meetings that to let us know in mid-January the outcome of the discussions did not help me and did not help you, because I only had one chance to get a meeting. And even now, having discussions because we're meant to be coming to the 7th of February cabinet, I may not be able to make that meeting depending on when I get the information back from the DfE. So I said it's unfair on the councillors to be able to scrutinise what is, as you say, it has a huge impact on the budget. I've been asked what impact will the DfE have on these numbers? And I've said, at the moment, I've got no idea, but it will change everything, possibly if we get funding, because it will change this year's outturn. It will change each of those years' provisions, but it still means only one element of the payment we get sort of free of any conditions. Everything else will be dependent on quarterly monitoring and achievement of targets. So if there's something else which happens COVID wise, so certainly, and Jane and I have had the conversations and we're trying to make clear some of our assumptions about how we can mitigate increase in EHCPs. However, if there is an increase in mental health requirements coming through from children through their EHCPs as a result of some of the issues they've suffered through COVID, that could still blow what we need out of the water and therefore could damage our chances of getting that DFE funding through. So it's still very much a moving feast, and that's why I couldn't update the DSG numbers until I get the information through, because if we don't get the funding, then we may have to challenge and change some of the assumptions we've previously made. Because if it's the 50% funding, we may not have 50% of the funding available to us. And then we'll have to have the conversations with the external auditor as well around the impact that has then on our value for money and the level of increase in our overall deficit compared to the amount of reserves that we do have. So I agree with you. It's difficult, but unfortunately that was the timescales the DfE are working towards. And they said, oh, it's earlier than last year. And it's like, well, it doesn't really help. It doesn't help me, and certainly doesn't help you to be able to challenge and understand and explain to know what the impact is.
For me, it is in fact less than £1 million from the balancing the budget reserve that is being used to support services across the board. Is that correct?
As I said, because we built in certainly those monies last year into the DSG, originally we were going to be using, I think, sort of 16 million of that balance in the budget reserve. That has come down. Obviously, when we brought the savings forward in December, there was an adjustment then. And as I said, because of some of the aspects and outcome of the settlement was better than we had forecast. So again, there was a 4 million swing. So what we're doing is pushing that money into future years to help reduce the gap in that year. So in some ways, it's an improved position over what we thought it would be, because we've got more monies to help future years than we previously had thought this year.
I think you've half answered my first question, which was, but maybe you could illuminate a bit more. What exactly is Plan B if the safety valve doesn't work or is not acceptable? And secondly, I think you said that the statutory override was going to end in 22-23. So given that we won't have solved the problem by then, how will we actually deal with the deficit without the statutory override to sort of paper over the cracks while we are dealing with it?
So if we're successful with the safety valve funding, the statutory override, whilst it may change and therefore we would have to show our deficit then as part of our usable reserves, the fact that we have a plan to help reduce it, and we would be putting additional monies in because the Secretary of State would have allowed us to do that, that would help. So I'm comfortable in that aspect. Sort of, as long as we do deliver. And the plan B, if we don't get the safety valve funding. So as I said, we've partly mitigated some of that by putting in additional resources of the £1 million. We would then need to review the amounts of money that we are setting aside to see what level of provision we would need to make. There is the government's SEN reform, which is they've stopped, stopped and have started again. So the outcome of that, there's quite a few other authorities waiting on the outcome of that to help resolve their deficits. Merton is certainly not alone in the size of the deficit that it has. Some of the counties, clearly relative funding, some of their expenditures is much larger, but some of the counties have £90 million deficits. So it's not just Merton as an outlier. There needs to be a fundamental review of the SEN, which hopefully that review will undertake, come forward and actually solve some of the issues. But we are still expanding some of our existing primary and secondary schools. Part of the conversation we had with the DfE was about doing further expansions. We would need to see the cost benefit of funding those ourselves if we're unsuccessful with the safety valve funding. So there are a few other things we would look to play with to come up with our plan B.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's very easy to not talk about the people behind this issue, and it's it's vulnerable children, it's their parents, it's families. So I'd like to just get some further detail about how, outside these conversations that are happening to deal with the deficit of this, how are we transforming services and the provision of support for the borough. And anecdotally, I know examples of parents who are doing 1, 2, 3 drop-offs. The borough couldn't provide their provision, and it's really, really, really tough. So I'd be grateful to hear what can we do? We're hearing a lot about what we're waiting on government for, but what can we do in borough to support and expand and transform the services so that we can maximise and strengthen our case to the government to say, look, we've done X, Y, and Z, over to you, without them saying and batting back to us, well, you still need to do these things. If you've got the details, it'd be fantastic to hear that, or if there's something separate. I know Peter mentioned a report to Schools and Families Committee as well. It'd be good to hear.
So certainly as part of the work that we did with the DfE, we set out the various actions that we were going to look to do to give them assurance that we were serious about tackling this, the options that we were looking at. So as I said, it's working with the head teachers, it's having the different reviews in place. Hannah herself is going to be chairing an SEND board. We've got regular meetings now set in place with the relevant cabinet leads, Jane and myself, to go through, because we had action plans behind each of the strategies that we were looking to embrace. So I think a very significant refocus now that Jane is in post, and she's appointed Elizabeth as a head of education to assist with that. So I think there is a good programme of work. So we're not just waiting for the DfE, we've got these things, but it's helping to prove to them what we can do, but we do need some of that funding to reduce the underlying deficit, because that's the challenge. It's very difficult to turn that tanker quickly. And originally we were looking to get the deficit down in year by 26, 27. And then it was like, well, how are you going to deal with all of the deficit? So that was the challenge. And that's why we've come up with those proposals. But certainly I would say it's a joint effort. We're not just saying over to you, DfE, just give us the money. We did ask for all of the deficit funding and they just told us no. But there's a lot of actions going that we're sort of working towards now. But it is going to be a long time. And as I said, those expansions of primary and secondary schools, they take time, engagement with teachers and governing bodies. So that I know the one for 22-23, letters had to go out before Christmas. So those were agreed. And in the current programme, further plans will need to come forward once we identify the appropriate sites and get agreement with the head teachers and governing bodies.
This one is the elephant in the room, isn't it? But, question though, Carolyn, more on the increase in core spending power. Is that? Yeah. So that's a 6.4% increase, of which council tax plus ASC comprises 3%, presumably. What are the other elements there?
So I would say there's assumptions behind the core spending power, one of which is around the level of council tax increase, which takes into account, assumes you will do the maximum level of the council tax increase, but also looks at changes to your council tax base. So of the core spending power for Merton, they are assuming a 3.6% increase in our council tax over the previous year. So even with what we're looking to do with the council tax increase of 2% plus the adult social care precept of 1%, we're 0.6% behind where they assume us to be. And that some of those changes in the council tax base as a result of either empty homes or particularly our council tax support scheme has an impact on that. So they take a range of assumptions around our previous sort of few years. So it's partly feeds into that. An element of it is the Section 31 grant for businesses. So obviously businesses have been told that they do not have to pay an increase in business rates this year. Local authorities will get a grant to cover what that indexation would have been. There has been, as I mentioned, increases in grants, particularly on adult social care. So the Better Care Fund has seen an increase, and sort of the social care grant itself. And there was an increase. So last year we got a surprise lower tier services grant. That's continued, and we've got an increase in that. So it's predominantly some additional grants that we've got, but the biggest chunk of that was the Section 31 grant for the businesses.
Any other questions of a general nature? I take it no. Can we then come on to take a look at the capital budget? Caroline, I'd be grateful if you could tell us of any late additions from where we looked at it back in November.
So we are looking to add in the expansions to primary, secondary schools, and potentially a new special school, because if we're successful with the safety valve funding, then those will be grant funded. We can bid for some of the grant funding to support those. So we're looking to add those in because it will help timing wise with those expansions, certainly in the earlier years. We are looking to have a contribution from Section 106 monies to the carbon offset fund, so to help those who are fuel poor in Merton, or their homes are fuel poor. So that's something that we're looking to do there. And potentially some step-free access schemes. So Network Rail have come forward with some timing. So again, we're looking to see for our 10% contribution to some schemes there. There will be those additions as well. I think that's, at this stage, that's the only changes to that. Clearly, once we come back in the new financial year with the medium and longer term delivery plans for your Merton, there will be some further changes to the capital programme. But at this stage, those are the only changes from what we brought to you in November.
Without my hunting through for it, I think there's around 2 million for the customer relationship management this time. What do we get for that?
Well, so certainly we are looking at a technology partner to assist with some of the infrastructure changes that we need to make to enable us to then have a better platform to work forward on. Clearly, for those of you who are sort of longer serving members of the Commission, we did have our customer contact strategy and our customer contact programme and all the work that we did with GDIT, which didn't go according to plan. So we'll be looking to refresh that, looking to have a digital strategy. We've done some work with our South London partnership bodies around the Internet of Things. So we want to make sure it's around sort of digital access. But we are conscious that COVID did highlight digital exclusion for certain residents, certain services and certain businesses. So we want to make sure that what we take forward is as inclusive as possible. And clearly some of the works that's got taken place within Chris's Department, Environment and Regeneration. So some of the works around the Fix My Streets, future a customer portal, so the work that Matt has done around the weekly, monthly newsletters to actually get people to register. So we do currently have a council tax and business rate portal to enable us to have a better relationship with people if they're willing to sign up for it, and have the alerts around libraries, missed bins or changed in collection arrangements, all of that to be much more integrated. So that's certainly what we're looking for, but that may take some time. So some of that monies may be split into future years, because we're just looking at the IT prioritisation side of things at this moment in time.
Okay, well, I regard myself as a bit digitally excluded. So are we going to get a better looking website out of this at the end of the day?
Because I keep asking certain things and it's like, well, it's better. And you think, that's certainly the feedback I get. And certainly when I come here, people still say it's not brilliant. It took us a while to get ownership back from GDIT and then to get the authoring tool back for our pages. So certainly that's something that we'll be looking at, because certainly when you look at some other websites, it's looking a bit tired. We were also very clear at the time it was going to be very much a transactional website, and it's whether that is still right for what we need going forward, because COVID did highlight, I think, quite a lot of change required on the digital side, and therefore we need to refresh and review. So that will link in with the digital strategy, the outcome of what Muir Merton was telling us around how people want to engage with us, how they want to interact with us. Most people don't really want to come anywhere near us. If they can do everything online, that's fine. But then there are clearly people who still need either someone at the end of a telephone or to be able to come into your the link downstairs. There are some authorities who have completely not reopened any of their front-facing services. But certainly, I think you clearly are aware coming in downstairs that we have done so. We still have mainly appointment basis, but the front desk, and that is very much a visible part of what we want to provide going forward at this stage.
So no more questions on the capital side. Let's look at the detailed savings proposed for this panel, which are on page 11. Thank you. I did know that. So this is on in the big thick pack. What I would say to you on these is that I don't think you're going to break into a trot over them, but equally the descriptions are pretty minimal. So do satisfy yourself that you actually understand. Or perhaps, Caroline, is it easier to ask you to talk us through some of the those that are just sort of a line and tell us what's going on?
Yeah. So as you saw, so with the targets that were set out in the October paper, certainly corporate services have met their target for 2022-23, significantly short in 23-24, but we want to do some further work. So as part of my department, to be aware, obviously when Sophie Ellis, the AD Customer Policy and Improvement, left, we were looking to do a restructure, but then COVID hit and we got a new chief exec. So we put some various proposals on pause because we want to also then wait to see Hannah engaged in a listening exercise, and clearly some of my services have a big impact on what she may want to do going forward. So we've paused on that. So in the interim, we thought, rather than sort of really rock the boat in some ways, where could we take some of the savings from, focusing predominantly on where we could generate further income, but being very clear around those types of income that we thought were safe. Because what we didn't want to have to do was then say, okay, yes, we'll do this, and then it's not going to happen because of other changes going on. So, but certainly the payroll, so on page 12, CS4, so we've got an increase in our schools buying back our services. We did lose a few schools. There is a provider out there which provides very cheap HR to schools. However, it doesn't provide the full range of services that we do. So that was really good that we've got schools coming back to us saying, can we provide the payroll service for them? As we are looking to have less pay slips and less admin, we've been able to reduce some of the expenditure there as well. So again, COVID appears to have had an impact on an increase in the number of weddings and services being held up in the registrar's office. So that's been quite nice to see, and also it's really good then to sort of get some additional income from it as well. Clearly, there has been less cash collected. So we have not gone cash free, but clearly as there is less cash being collected through either our parking machines because people aren't necessarily carrying significant amounts of cash, but also as more people are using Ringo as well, we've been able to find savings from our cash collection contract. The one staff saving that we did have there, which was CS8, is one that had already been implemented. So there was a restructure, head of information governance post was deleted, and transfer of functions, because we are losing at some point our land charges service back to the government department, but we need to do some work there. So they have gone to moving to the environment and regeneration team to link with the planning side there, and the complaints has gone with part of the comms team, because we need to have sort of a closer understanding between what are the issues coming in, how does it then link with our communications, but also our front desk and customer engagement. So that's what we look to do there. And the FOIs and subject access requests have gone to our FOI team within legal services. The rest, though, there was also then some savings from canvassing, because again, we've been able to change the way we do some of the canvassing, so therefore less postage and also less expenses with the numbers of canvases going out. So we hope to be able to improve on that. The rest are then, I think, mainly sort of running cost savings, where we've looked to sort of shave monies off consultancy budgets, and that some are still needed for some of the ad hoc tasks that we need to do, but we've looked to mitigate those at this stage to then see, do we come back with a sort of more of a major restructure at some point in the future.
And CS8 and CS12 seem, is there an overlap? Is that split between two departments in some way? Yeah, okay. I'm looking to see if anyone has questions. Paul.
Just a little question. CS3, is that just a better deal we've got, or are we not insuring something?
So we have transferred our insurance service to Sutton, and they are providing a better service than we were able to do internally. So therefore, if we're able to resolve claims earlier, they don't escalate as much, and therefore we don't need as much money set aside for our either self-insurance or insurance provision generally.
Is that a hope, or do we know that's worked? That they're getting better at it, they're better at it?
They've certainly had a major improvement in going through the amount of outstanding issues. So yes, definitely better for us. There are still some areas we need to pick up still internally, but we are working on that. But we've got a stronger basis to be able to pick those areas up, as opposed to, oh, it's with insurance, you know, we'll get back to you. It's then honing in on those other areas where we still need to make further improvements.
So I think it looks as if we're happy to accept all of those proposed savings without amendment. Great, good. So let's move on to consider whether we want to make any referrals back to Cabinet, or indeed let's take the what we have from the panels first. Aidan, do you want to just provide us with a commentary on your panel last night?
Certainly, Chair. So we had a very grateful for Caroline dialing in and giving us a similarly excellent background and understanding of challenges and opportunities ahead. So obviously, Chris went through his budget. This has been one of obviously the last budgets that he'll be here with us, I'm afraid, and he provided sort of great understanding generally of the challenges and opportunities within this on the macro level. So generally the greater digitalisation, focus on sort of better contracts when they come up for renewal. How can we maximise that? And obviously commercial opportunities and developing services where needed. The conversation in the panel went into sort of two main areas. One was talking about the cost pressures on us as a council, so particularly talking about TfL. So what are the risks there coming forward? So we're talking about obviously the Mayor's announcement on road pricing and how will that affect parking charges, and thinking how the sort of local economy and also dynamics of the purchasing power of our residents in terms of the use of parking. But of course, Dean City Farm marked in our papers, it came up. We made one recommendation to this panel here to look a bit closer at that spending, following a proposal from Councillor Draper, and the saving marked is for a future year, so that's 2 calendar years time, one future financial year's time. And I believe probably Councillor Draper will no doubt talk on this. His suggestion was to basically migrate about 24 or so £1,000 that would gone to Mitcham Common Conservators to fill this gap in the revenue funding. On personal reflection and speaking with officers and cabinet member, I think it'd be good to hear more from them and officers about the opportunities to switch that revenue spending to capital. And more importantly, on a point that Caroline was probably was touching on and probably could tease more out on in future, is our partnership working with others, because our benefits and skills are more than just in pounds and pence. They're in capabilities and competence, and the services we can offer organisations like Dean City Farm, like parking enforcement. If you're trying to park down there with small kids, it's always challenging. So these are opportunities we've got, which are in-kind benefits. So those are the general turn of discussion, some reflections I've got. Good to talk more on that particular item and others, of course, as we go through all the panels referrals back to this commission.
Just to take, there's quite a lot there, but I did feel that it was the wish of the panel not to proceed with that saving in this year. I mean, maybe it's a year away, so it can be revisited, yeah?
So I mean, it isn't for this year anyway, it's for a future year. So that's the key thing anyway. I think on reflection, what we need to do, and I've been told this many times, is give officers and the cabinet member the time to talk with the organisation and enable them the capacity and that space to work a proposal that works for them. So that's my understanding of the conversation I've had following the meeting as well. I think it's important that panels like myself refer things here for further discussion with members like Nick, David, others, to go through that. But that's my reflection on that here. We're of course going to make a ruling on that, and it will then proceed to cabinet or not. But that's the context. Owen and others may want to add on to that as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's, in a way, it's a bit of a pity that we've had to mention Mitcham Common, because until it's actually discussed with them, we're in exactly the same boat as we are with Dean City Farm. But my feelings are it's obviously up to you generally, but my feelings are that savings like this shouldn't really be put forward earlier than necessary. Certainly not before everything's been worked out, which hasn't been in this case. Now, I've identified an alternative saving of about £30,000, which I've discussed with the cabinet member, but I won't give you details before they've been thrashed out, because they haven't been thrashed out. We've got a year to do that. That's the important thing. We've got a year in which to actually get things clear. As I understand it, there are really sensible suggestions, and some of them have come from Aidan, about how to support Dean City Farm better while saving the council money, but they haven't been fully thrashed out. And of course, they've been totally ignored by the petition, by the people who've actually put the petition forwards. And I believe that isn't Dean City Farm themselves. It may be that 30,000 quid can't be saved, but that's not a reason for not trying. And it certainly isn't a reason for announcing the Dean City Farm saving a year before you actually need to. I have to tell you, this isn't a heart-rending appeal to save Dean City Farm. You know, it's a straight arrow. It's just an alternative way of saving money that might work. And we've always been told if we want to stop a particular saving, we need to find a different saving elsewhere. And this is just that. Thank you very much, Chair.
And I mean, reflecting on this last night too, it does occur to me that as we get further into what our residents want to see coming out of the My Merton exercise, with the emphasis on our parks and open spaces and getting out there and, you know, enjoying leisure activities, Dean City Farm could play a pretty central role in that. So as well, not to rush to judgment and go with that. So in this year, Paul.
Yes, I'm glad that you've taken back the Dean City Farm saving, but I'm a bit confused. You said Merton Common, so have you robbed Peter to pay Paul? I thought the whole point was you didn't need to bring these forward straight away because there should be conversations with various people, presumably including Mitcham Common conservators.
Chair, if I may, it's kind of a read my lips moment. What I've just said is that it may well be that the saving can't come from Mitcham Common, not Merton Common, Mitcham Common. But the idea is you've got a year in which to try and do that as an alternative. And it's not robbing Peter to pay for Paul. I mean, they both might have to happen in time. You know, the council is in difficult straits, like every council is, and I'm not going to go into all the kerfuffle as to exactly why, but we all know exactly why, and we know that things are going to get worse, and it may well be that you have to take both cuts in time. It's just that here and now there is an alternative, and I am suggesting that this could be an alternative to take.
Sure, if we've established the principle that we shouldn't bring these cuts in until we have to, we've talked to the people, why have we brought in another party? Why have we brought in Mitcham Common at this point? Surely the point is we don't need to bring anyone in. We've got to go away and think about this and talk to various people.
I couldn't agree with you more. I, as I said at the very beginning of my when I started speaking, I didn't really want Mitcham Common mentioned at this particular point, because all it does is it muddies the water. It is an alternative that we might be able to use. That's all.
No, thanks, Chair. I think this is, this is a very mature sort of group of people and discussion. Let's keep it that way and think about what are we really talking about here. What we're really talking about is on a macro level, we've got two fantastic resources in the borough, one in my ward, and on personal level, I visit every day or every other day, as someone with a family. So I know the benefits of these firsthand. What I would say is there is a point that any organisation, charity, resource does need to mature. And how can we change our thinking from a sheer here's the money to a how can we coach you and support you and grow you to be bigger and better? Frankly, Mitcham Common, I want to say this to my Wimbledon colleagues, is better than Wimbledon Common, I think, in a lot of respects, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of just generally. But from a footfall perspective, commercial perspective, it doesn't get the love. What can we do to maximise that and support the area? Again, with Dean City Farm, love it. Go to my boy. Haven't managed to go to my girl yet for a variety of COVID reasons. But it's, how can we grow that? And council funding can, to a degree, limit that to a point where you can't go for certain grants, you can't go for certain things. So changing the relationship of how we work with civil society, how we work with organisations, how we work with resources, is a very mature conversation, important place to have. And as we move into the future, it's a conversation we're just going to have to get more used to, and it's right to have that conversation. And it's important, but let's mindful in terms of the specifics here on paper. It is for a future year. But what I'm hearing from everyone in the room is, you know, let's give officers and cabinet members the time to thrash it out and see what it is, and go from there. But if you hear differently, tell me.
I'll certainly agree that it would be very helpful for those that do attend this committee that they don't muddy the waters. I mean, Mitcham Common, you're right, it's a lovely place, and we and those that live in Wimbledon, and you know, I'm very central, would never think anything other. And of course, I didn't realise it was a competition. But I'm disappointed that Mitcham Common's been brought in, as it's been said, that it's a future year's saving, and there was absolutely no need to create confusion.
We do indeed. Great. Peter, Councillor McKay, I'm going to come to you. Do you have anything you want to tell us about the deliberations at your panel? I know you chose not to make a reference back, but...
Sure, I think we had a very good presentation from the Assistant Director about the overall finances of the authority, and members had the opportunity to ask the Acting Director about the specific effects of the proposals that were ahead of us. I think that was helpful for us to have the opportunity to hear in detail what the impact was. And at the end of that, there was contentment with what was proposed and no reference backs.
And we don't have Councillor Sally Kenny, to speak for the CYP. But I know they didn't make any reference back. We had a useful discussion there. Looking around for anyone to pick up from CYP? No. Okay. Can I ask if anybody then has anything you want to table at this point by way of a reference for us to consider? No. So you'll have to put up with mine, won't you? Is this something we can put on screen? No. Okay. These are some proposals, some thoughts I had today. First one is about the way we do this. We always seem as the Commission to be one step behind Cabinet. So tonight, for example, we are looking at the December budgetary round, and if you've been through this, you'll realise that it contains 3 iterations of the budget. We're now looking at the 3rd one. In the knowledge that Cabinet have already 2 days ago been looking at a 4th iteration. I think if we just could move this particular meeting back a week, we could be in step with Cabinet rather than always one step, one stage behind, and that would, albeit I know the timetabling is always difficult, but that would indeed add rather more meaning to our work when we know we're looking at current figures. I mean, David has already alluded to the Cabinet, the medium-term financial strategy. So when I factor in the effects of those numbers at the bottom, the gap for future years do change dramatically, and we really need to be looking at the most up-to-date figures. For example, the gap for 23-24 comes down from 12.8 million to 6.5 million, and the gaps for subsequent years also reduce. But Caroline, this is for you to, well, I hope we won't sort of rule out the feasibility of at least examining whether we couldn't bring these two into alignment rather more.
So I'm hoping that the report that comes to February Council will show that you have the time to review before the Cabinet because of the issues that we've had this time around. So, but that may be something that we'll have a look at again just to check, because I was concerned about the timings when we were looking at that, but I'll just go back and confirm whether it's after the Cabinet or not.
Because we could have this meeting a week later and still feed into Cabinet on February the 7th, in fact. So that's all I'm asking that we should look at. Yeah.
Then certainly that's what I've asked, that because there's normally 2 meetings of the ONS in January. So I've asked that the later one is the meeting that we have, and this time around it was the early one. So that's what I've asked, and that's what they're looking to do.
Thank
so
you.
Hopefully that should give you that assurance when it comes in February.
My second point relates to our use of the balancing the budget reserve, something that David has already touched on. And we are using some 11.5 million to close the gap for next year. And the text that goes with that said it should be recognised that the use of reserves is a one-off form of funding. An alternative ongoing savings need to be identified to address the budget gap over the long term. So it is my impression that we have become quite dependent on the balancing the budget reserve. I mean, that's fine, but I think we need Cabinet to consider whether that is sustainable. So that's and the Caroline, I don't know whether you want to comment. No.
Sorry, Chair. I suppose what I would say is that at least because we show on page 88 of the papers in front of you tonight, and then page 25 of the paper that we took to Cabinet on Monday, that because we then utilise all of that balance in the budget reserve, the gap does increase in those future years, and therefore it feeds into those savings targets that we had already set out for October Cabinet. So that's what the savings targets would then be reduced if we don't need the balance in the budget reserve. So it's different where if you've just got a one-off reserve and you don't plan for it to end and therefore ignore the fact that your gap has increased. So that's what we just look to do. And that's part of the future planning that we have to enable people to plan longer and further ahead, for certainly for changes to service, to enable us to utilise that. And that's part of the rationale for having savings in future years brought forward for you to see, so we can start that work with the planning and at times discussions with external organisations as well.
Because there have been times when it's almost seemed like you've conjured up a magic money tree with the use of the reserve. And my final point was that we talked about this again, the resolution of the DSG deficit now being, we hope, only a few more emails away. And there will then, I think you described the impact of that as significant, the other evening. There will then be options for Cabinet. We could look to replenish reserves. We could look to use the money to cancel unachievable savings. We could look to the priorities that we're identifying with John Merton. We could even look at the climate change action plan. That there will be some attractive choices to be made. And my request really is that Cabinet should involve scrutiny in those choices. It has been true in the past that when money has come through quite late in the day, scrutiny has not been involved. I'm going back a few years actually. And I do ask that we are involved with those choices when we find ourselves in that situation.
As a grey head here that's going to give up looking at a 46th budget, I agree with all of the points you made. I think it is always difficult to find the right way of involving non-exec councillors in the budget process and getting the timing of that right. What I think, having sort of been on both sides of the debate at various times, is that we end up talking about minutiae, and you know, that doesn't serve us well, and in particular, and I'm just especially picking up on your last point about involvement when the numbers change. We did seek within the last 12 months, I think probably at the last budget meeting, to encourage the cabinet to look at the balances on a more regular basis, and that could then involve, because they only ever come in the budget cycle, they don't come in any monthly report. Whereas when the accounts are closed and various sums of money come in, it seems to me, with the greatest respect to Caroline, whose professionalism I absolutely acknowledge, but it's very much done at the stroke of the director's pen. That money gets squirreled away into this reserve and that reserve, and a bit more goes into the balancing the budget reserve. But there's no scrutiny on that, and I'm not even sure that the cabinet have proper oversight of how that's done, and I don't think that's right, because, as you say, we end up with a significant sum of money in the balance in the budget reserve that is sort of unaccountable, and we need to be able to have a better grip on the detail and not just accept that the 11 million pounds, 11.5 million pounds will get shoved into the next year from the balancing budget reserve, so we get zero at the bottom. Well, we need to always get zero at the bottom, because otherwise we can't have a budget. But it does make a mockery, I think, of some of the other work we do to scrutinize savings. I accept some of these savings are small, and the old proverb, many a mickle makes a muckle, all the little bits add up. They do, but I think we sometimes take our eye off the ball.
Yes, I sometimes think back to those days when we waxed passionate over paddling pools and annual bedding plants, which indeed was minutiae, wasn't it? But at least we've got away from that. Ben.
Thank you. I suppose I would say that the Financial Monitoring Task Group do look at the monitoring reports on a quarterly basis, and one of those is the year end, which does include the allocations to reserves as well. So there is some scrutiny of those numbers and the reserves in particular. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that.
Thank you, Chair. And just to maybe get away from my minutiae for a tiny bit, I'd just like to hear some history from Caroline, because her professional career goes back quite, you have yeah, I don't have to be careful there, sorry. But in terms of your view on having to increase the reserves, budget balancing reserves, are there external factors to this? I mean, I might have my political views of what external factors there are to this, but in terms of, just a ratio over time, how much more money per budget is having to go into this overall, into this balancing budget reserve overall? were there times that were different in that amount you need to put in? Is it due, I might put a hypothesis in, for instance, to a kind of long-term uncertainty of funding from government since 2010? Is that a correlated pattern there? And I will preempt by saying that is a political statement, but I'd like to hear a kind of figure from Caroline on that.
So I suppose you are correct. I have been doing budgets here for quite a while, not quite as long as David though. So I would say that the balance in the budget reserve, we sort of introduced it to help, and as David said, smooth some of the changes we need to make. So previously, some of those gaps have been significantly large, and what we didn't want was to focus purely on next year and do cuts we didn't necessarily need to do because they could have impacted the wrong way on those services. So that's what we look to do. If we could set some monies aside, predominantly at year end, if there was some monies that weren't necessarily available, then therefore they could be part of that and it would help us over time. So we keep saying that it will come to an end, and that balance in the budget reserve hasn't fully been utilised. So that in itself is good because we've managed to find things that we need to do, and we can still help plan for transformation, further savings, or indeed sometimes if there's cuts in funding that we weren't necessarily expecting. So we are still anticipating a fair funding review. Not quite sure of the timings. If we're going to have it for 23-24, the government needs to start in April. Not sure if they're going to be geared up to be able to do that. So again, we're trying to work with them to see when are you going to start, because we need to be able to plan on the impacts of those, particularly if the levelling up agenda feeds into that, because money will move away from London. If you look at sort of the reserves, that was then in response to the challenges I've had around the reserves, how much money we have got. Probably unusual in that we bring the sort of 4-year use of those reserves as part of the cabinet report and business plan report to show what is being used over time. We have an explanation of each of those reserves in our annual accounts and in the budget book as well. So to help give an understanding of squirreling away or what they're set aside for genuine purposes. So certainly as part of the closing of last year's accounts, we set aside £2 million for the Climate Change Fund. We set aside £1 million for Your Merton. And you'll have seen certainly in sort of the December and January cabinet, we have utilised and made allocations for the £1 million for the Your Merton funding for the short-term deliverables that have arisen out of the consultation process, and the climate change funding with some of the updates that will be coming forward. Again, we've got plans for the utilisation of that. So that's part of the challenges, and having some of those flexibilities helps me, helps directors, helps our residents with some of those service changes. Our reserves will have increased over time. Because I think originally, as though Jed said when he first started here, there was negative balances. The authority had negative balances. So we've improved to and come a long way. But the level of grants that we get sometimes goes into our balances and reserves. And particularly at the end of last year, we had 14.5 million for business rates that came through as a grant, which then went into our earmarked reserves. So again, that skews some of the numbers. So we try and break it down to say, here are the ones where their grants have to be utilised for certain purposes. Here are the ones where we've earmarked them. So the balance in the budget, we say it does exactly what it says in the tin. We have what we called an outstanding council programme board, where we fund some of our transformation, some of the works that need to be done to change the ways of thinking, service delivery, engaging with residents, and to fund some of the legwork originally around capacity for the Your Merton work in particular. So sort of some of the consultation, some of the work, all of that fed into there. So quite a long-winded answer, but it's quite a lot going on, because as certain levels of government funding reduce, And we have thought, oh, okay, we can rely more on our own levels of funding and income. COVID came along and hit us hard, particularly in parking and the events generation side in environment regeneration. And that's also part of the challenge that TfL have had, because they were sort of looking to have less reliance on government funding, going predominantly passenger transport funded income. And of course, they lost all of their passenger numbers. So it's trying to balance all of the scenarios. So I don't come to you after the settlement in January and say, okay, sorry, I got it wrong. We need another 5 million. We need cuts from April. And the easiest way of delivering on those is staff. And that's a very short term, wrong impact to be able to do that. So that's what we try and help mitigate everything, to try and balance it all out to get the best solution for members and for residents as well.
Actually, Chair, Caroline answered my question in her response. So, but I mean, a general comment back, I think, you know, her team and previous, you know, Owen getting it over the line, but Tobin and obviously Mark, previous cabinet members of finance, you know, need to also sort of take heed that it's fantastic, managed to deliver this while other boroughs have gone bust, and the smoothing approach does work. I think on the points we've heard about scrutiny, and as you know, as a champion of scrutiny, I would only say, can we further transform and be innovative? You know, in my professional life, you know, we'd have dashboards and various things like this, and where possible, while I don't think scrutiny on a daily and transactional basis is necessarily helpful, I think more education and understanding. I say that as someone who's you know, studied economics and applied statistics, you know, it's always helpful to understand what's the logic and policy thinking and connecting things together as a golden thread. But overall, and that's my general feedback, and thanks for Caroline and the work.
So no further comments. So Rosie, can I ask you to send this around to people tomorrow? And if people have any thoughts or comments on it, and you can feedback to me, but otherwise I think I've fairly summarized the pretty uncontentious points so I was trying to make there. But with this discussion, I have to say it is it does bring home to me that we owe an awful lot to Caroline's careful stewardship, and you know, David and I have been around long enough to remember how it was before, and it was year to year. And I'll probably get this wrong, but at one point we borrowed a sum of money over 50 years just because the rate looked attractive, you know. So we don't do, you know, we don't get drawn into silly things like that now. And indeed, you know, we only have to look at our neighbours to realise just how much we owe to Caroline for keeping us on, you know, the straight and level with looking after our monies very well. Good. I think we can draw this to a close. Yeah. Are we okay to? I mean, I'm happy to amend with any comments you may want to feedback via email. That, but then of course, you know. Yeah. Aidan, you've got a way around this, yeah?
I can probably think of a few creative ways around this, but I think, I mean, on my panel's perspective, I think we had a fantastic conversation. I would sort of welcome everyone's input. I mean, I don't think we will be taking our recommendation forward to cabinet given it's next year. I mean, an email conversation I think is useful. I think points of clarity and questions are probably more useful so that we can get the answers and have those published, because there may be things we don't know. And then if we want to pursue that further, we can do. That's just my general thinking here, because also I'm just thinking we've also come up with a lot of questions here as well, that there isn't time, or because of the policy expertise isn't on the call, or because of the nature of the duration of this meeting as well. that's my sort of feedback. I don't know what you think, Nick, or others.
The Constitution does require me to go to Cabinet and feedback. That's all I'm trying to do here, really, is to have. Yeah, you're happy with that?
I think.
Well, it would, but
I mean, but by email is not necessarily unusual. I think it's just challenging, as you wouldn't know what, being the formal meeting, you know, there's a beginning, middle and end. I think you need to make a formal recommendation to Cabinet. I think from the probably the safest way to do it is going through the panels. Is there anything to take? Yes or no? And if there isn't anything to take, is there anything to take from the room? So we've heard from Peter's and my panel, there isn't anything really to take. We've discussed that. Is there anything from any other panels? Yes or no? And is there anything from in the room? If it's no, then the recommendation probably is more of a feedback on the conversation in the room about scrutiny, feedback, your point about getting ahead, yeah, and saying these are procedural issues as how it's presented, but rather that than X, Y, Z, ABC needs to be changed.
Sure. Not quite sure about the Dean City Farm issue, because I thought we were really being invited to pass forward that motion from Sustainable Communities last night to Cabinet. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So-
we'd like to put that to the vote. Yeah.
Put that to a vote.
Yeah.
I know that our colleagues last night abstained because they got rather confused about the Mitcham Common issue that muddied the waters. I think it's just simpler to say that Dean City Farm saving for 23-4 should be put on hold.
Can I just, I mean, so just for clarity, we're not, because that's not taking the actual recommendation fully from the panel. If we're going to stick to the sort of the letter of it, and I appreciate you probably want to thresh it out more here and propose what you've proposed. I mean, my view is that this is a future year saving. There is conversation to have. You know, we don't want to tie the hands of officers or Cabinet members or indeed Dean City Farm until those conversations have been had. Clearly, you know, there are points to be made for other reasons, but that would be my suggestion, given the conversation of the yesterday and also the thoughtfulness of the panel to make sure it was brought to discussion here through the recommendation that Nick proposed. But if there's any other comments on it, let's hear that.
Certainly my understanding was that from the reference I saw today that was circulated, that we were saying that particular saving should be deferred. I mean, that's the essence of it, isn't it?
But my point, it is actually deferred because it's not this year. It's already deferred because it's for a future year. So by deferring it again for another year, we're preventing conversations happening because we're saying you can't have this. So it's already deferred.
I'm going to listen to Caroline.
So I think what it may be that it's taken out of the proposals for the budget and discussions happen behind the scenes and it could come back or not. So that's what I think you mean by deferring, as opposed to deferring in the MTFS sense is normally into 24-25. We're not talking about that. We're saying taking it out. So therefore the budget gap will increase in 23-24, but discussions go on behind the scenes and then you come forward with a different. Yeah, but it's.
That sounds good. Can we have a vote on that?
Yes,
Yes.
I'd like to put that forward.
We are voting on
To
Dean
take it
City
out.
Farm, that we take it out, the possibility that it may come back in a
I'm happy to propose that.
Yep.
Second.
second.
Could I have that recorded, please? Second.
So, oh, are we,
What are they suggesting? I don't understand.
Is it what Caroline?
so it's very, very simple. We're proposing that be taken out. What happens to it subsequently can wait another day.
So just for clarity, you're proposing to increase the budget gap for the future year of the council. Is that what I'm hearing from colleagues in the room? Is that the wisest choice at this time of calendar year?
We are proposing indeed to increase the gap for 23-24 by, was it £46,000? Its gap is currently £6.5 million. So it's, and we, you know, it's manageable.
We've heard pennies and pounds.
Hmm?
Chair, sorry, I'm just not really sure I'm convinced that we should actually do that, to be honest, because you know, if we're keeping it in for the for a saving to be carried out in the next financial year, why can conversations not be had in the next year that need to be had to put it on the right footing? So why can't it stay in and those conversations be had, because there'll be a impetus to have them? So I'm not really sure I support deferring, deleting it.
There's all, sorry, you can speak.
Chair, if I may, my intention was never to defer the actual saving. It was just to find out where the saving was coming from, and I didn't mention Mitcham Common quite deliberately, because what I actually said, and I've said it again tonight, is that there are deliberations to be had. It may well be that the best way of saving this money is through work with Dean City Farm. It may well be that it's a really sensible saving. We don't know at this stage. At this moment, all it comes across as is a cut, and that is what the petition's going on about. I've talked about a potential alternative, which I think deserves to be looked through, and I don't see anything wrong with that. So I'm not deferring the actual £43,000. Far from it. I'm actually saying take away the context of Dean City Farm at this precise moment in time. Thank you.
This seems unnecessarily complicated. What did exactly, Aidan? What did your panel? What was the resolution from your panel? Because I've not seen it in writing. Have I missed it? Is it somewhere?
No, it's a good question. So
today. So what does it actually say?
So
no, read it out. I don't mean you just remembering it. I want to hear the actual resolution.
To recommend Cabinet hold saving ENV 2022-2303 regarding Dean City Farm on the basis that it is a saving to be made in 23-24 and anticipation of finding an alternative saving.
So that's what we're voting on. So that's, Caroline has said the way to do that is just remove it from Dean City Farm for 2023-24, add 40,000 to the 600.5 million we are out of kilter for 23-24. The fact that you are now changing you're speaking on behalf of your scrutiny panel. You can't just start saying you're against it. You were bringing it forward. You're now trying to.
Just try and cut across this, please.
As a chair of the panel, I can say pretty much, you know, in the basis of what I want. I mean, the reality is that you make a proposal to this panel here, and you do further work. Scrutiny is not just about the 9:15 meeting to 9 o'clock in the evening meeting. You have conversations, you evolve. What Nick's recommendation was basically very factual. Was to hold it until further conversations have been had. My reflection on it is to basically say that we don't want to bind the hands of officers or cabinet members from having those conversations by saying it's kicking into the long grass further. My more macro point is that the risk setting that we're going to set, and the message we're sending to officers is partnership working, using services for commercial benefits with organisations, linking A, B, C together for the benefit of the borough is not the right thing to do, because that's the general message we're saying as well.
Right. We have never before at the commission countermanded or changed a referral from a panel. So as was agreed last night, I think we should stay with. I really don't want to start second guessing what the panels do. Caroline, did you have anything to add there? But otherwise, I'm going to strongly recommend that we endorse what the panel decided last night. Yeah.
I suppose I just wanted to say, if talking about deferral is into a future year. So it depended on what you actually want to do. If you want to say you would like Cabinet to reconsider this particular saving, enter into further discussions, it still stays in if your concern is you're going to be increasing that gap. And then it can come back either with other options or that, but the gap stays the same, but you've highlighted your concerns based on the recommendation from the panel. That may also be an option for you.
Oh, and as cabinet member.
Thank you for this. I'm reluctant to see this go through, but not for the reasons that you may suspect. It's because I'm reluctant because I think it was wrongly worded last night with regards to the deferral. I also think that it brings in another element, another entity in a way that we don't want to do, because I think that would just put the cat amongst the pigeons, that suddenly this has passed and they've got to look at it, and that's the last thing we want to do at this moment, because some of the position we're in at the moment now is because of a lack of communication. Instead, I think that it would be better if we commit to coming back to this committee or to one of your financial management task group or one of the other committees as you see fit, Chair, to report on what we're doing on the financial sustainability of Dean City Farm, what we've done this year with regards to the sale, what we intend to do in the future with regards to land, parking and so forth to ensure their financial sustainability, and also to reconsider the size, the 46,000, right? So a full package and an explanation of what's going on there. So we just move away from what was, I don't like what was decided last night for the reasons I've said, but move away to a far more conciliatory, let's report back. And if you wish to look at Dean City Farm and the financial sustainability of Dean City Farm over the coming years, I think that's wise, right? But let's get away from this sort of delete it, defer it, find savings from someone else who we haven't told nonsense, okay?
Sorry, I feel I'm letting this drag on too long, but I would, I think I'd like to wrap it up, really. David.
You said it yourself, really. The panel result, I'm just reading what was put round on the email. The panel resolved 5 votes in favour, 2 abstentions, to recommend Cabinet hold saving ENV 2022-23 regarding Dean City Farm on the basis it's a saving to be made in 23-24 and in anticipation of finding an alternative saving. I see no reason that we shouldn't pass that forward to Cabinet, and Cabinet will respond. Cabinet will either say yes, and we will do what Caroline was suggesting, just adjust the MTFS, or Cabinet will say, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do something else. And then we can deal with that at the budget meeting with the council.
So can we vote on that, please? In favour of what has just been? Okay. So it does seem to be, and against, please, and not voting. Okay. Thank you very much. Wouldn't normally unless members request it. So. Best way to deal with this, I can quickly read out my points. Shall I do that? Is that the best way? Okay. Point 1. Commission members welcome the opportunity to scrutinise the budget and business plan 22-26, acknowledge the difficulties officers have faced in finalising it, while the legacy costs of the pandemic remain unfunded and unresolved. Point 1. Point 2, because of the timetable for the budget process, the Commission has consistently been one step behind the Cabinet, e.g. scrutinising the 3rd iteration of the budget on the 19th of January, when Cabinet has already approved the 4th iteration 2 days earlier. The timetable should be reviewed to see whether the final Commission meeting can be delayed to ensure scrutiny of the latest budget iteration while still allowing time to feed back to the final Cabinet in this year. That's on the 7th of February. 3rd point, in recent years, heavy reliance has been placed on the balancing the budget reserve to close the gap and set a balanced budget, 11.5 million for 22-23. The text notes, it should be recognised that the use of reserves is a one-off form of funding, and alternative ongoing savings need to be identified to address the budget gap over the long term. Question, is the Cabinet satisfied that this degree of dependence on the balancing the budget reserve is sustainable? 4th point, resolution of the DSG deficit is now tantalizingly close, with the potential to impact the final budget for 22-23. Cabinet will be faced with various options for allocating the provisions released, including, amongst others, replenishing the balancing the budget reserve, cancelling unachievable savings, funding priorities identified by your Merton, moving forward with the climate change action plan. Cabinet is requested to ensure that scrutiny members are involved in the discussion of these alternatives.
Chair, I'm happy to support your first 2 points. I'm not sure I'd support the second 2 points because I think the concept of reserves being a one-off spend is kind of self-evident, and I don't think that needs pointing out. And on the point about scrutiny being involved in helping make decisions about how money is spent, I don't think that's the role of scrutiny committees. So I can support it in the first 2. I can't support the second 2.
Well, I'm happy to second your proposal. And clearly there is pre-decision scrutiny. That's a crucial part of scrutiny. The idea of scrutiny plays no role in decision making is clearly wrong.
Billy, I will say this, I do think that it's the job of the Cabinet to act as the executive, but it is also absolutely the role of scrutiny to advise and offer a view on in the process of policy formulation. That's all I'm saying. Ken,
sorry, Chair, sorry, can I just say I accept that, but it seems like you're asking for more of a role, and that's the bit I don't kind of understand or necessarily think I agree with.
I. Yep, yeah. To vote on the motion, therefore, if nobody wants to amend. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, that was heavy weather, but got there in the end. Our next meet, oh, we do have though to have to remind you that we do have the borough commander coming to see us in March, and she has promised to come in person, so do think about questions. And meanwhile, we do have a further meeting on the 16th? Yes, yes, to carry out pre-decision scrutiny on Chas, which will be very interesting. So keep that one in your diaries. Okay, thank you all. We have, yes, yes, sorry, David. No, well, I thought I had really by mentioning the borough commander coming. David, do you want to discuss the program in more detail? All right. We note the program. Thank you.